boost in Houston, Texas. And I want to hear from you. So many of you. Good morning. Good morning. It is Tuesday morning. It is time for the Rutledge Perspective Radio Show live here in Houston, Texas, on the corner of Alameda and Wichita in the historic Third Ward, in the historic KCOH TV radio station. We're going to be talking about risk today, taking risks, moving through risks. All things risk today is what we're going to be talking about. And I am just excited to be here. And I'm your host, Laurel Rutledge. And it's going to be a good day. We just know it's going to be a good day because we are on this side of the daisies today. So hopefully you guys can hear me. My mic, I don't seem to be getting a little thing, but I'm assuming that's all connected. So a couple of things before we get started. Mine. No, you're good. A couple of things before we get started. Dang it. Forgot my vote pen. See, that's why things were crazy because I don't have my vote pen on. For those of you who have not listened to me before, who may be tuning in for the first time, always talk about voting. And I got a couple of new things for you guys today because our Gen Z, y'all, we adults can't seem to get it right. But this Gen Z group, they are not having it, right? They are doing die-ins in Tennessee. They are Look, they have got this stuff together. They are making things happen. And so there is a lot, especially in Texas, there's a bill going through. Representative Carrie Isaac, she's a Republican out of New Braunfels, who has put a bill forth that would eliminate polling places on college campuses. And of course, everybody's ready. So the lawsuits are ready to file against that because that's just keeping Gen Z not in the mix of stuff. And they are so ready. They are so ready to do their part to make sure that things get back to some semblance of adult reasonableness. And so that kind of stuff is happening, especially for college campuses. So you have the issue around ID. So many kids that go away to college may not have their driver's license yet, especially this generation. A lot of them don't even want to drive. They don't have any interest in driving. My niece, I think, just got her driver's license, right? They don't have any interest in driving, so they don't have a driver's license. They may or may not have a regular, just government issued ID. All of those kind of things are a challenge, and especially if they're going to school out of state, right? Do they have a passport? Have they been anywhere that they need a passport? So the ID piece was where they first started. Now they're trying to take polling places off, and even in Texas A&M, they shut down the polling places at Texas A&M in the fall. And after they shut it down, right, it wasn't there. They came back and did some research, and that was the busiest polling place in the county, and they shut it down. Why? It's on a college campus. Gen Z overwhelmingly votes a certain party. So you know what this is. This is about fear. This is about control. And more importantly, it's about suppression, right? Let these young folks vote. Let them vote. What are you afraid of? If you really believe in your message, if you think your way is the way to go, then you let them vote, right? And make it easier for people to vote. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to vote. So there's a couple of things that I found that are, I think, really helpful. So campusvoteproject.org. If you've got a young person, campusvoteproject.org, nonpartisan, 501c3. They've got a place where you can plug in your state, and it will tell you what the campus voting rules are in your state where you're going to college. So that is campusvoteproject.org. Another one is called allinchallenge.org. Allinchallenge.org. Again, nonpartisan, wanting to make sure people know how to vote, how to get registered, making decisions as to whether you keep your registration at home and mail it in or whether you re-register where you're going to school, all those kind of things. So campusvoteproject.org and allinchallenge.org. So for all you Gen Z who are going to get us back on the straight and narrow, I hope, because we can't seem to get it together. Although I'm seeing more and more grown folks actually, us Gen Xers actually finally standing up to this insanity. Come on, Gen Z, because you're going to be making decisions for me when I'm 80. So I need y'all to come on. So those and I see that the vice president is in Tennessee at Fisk for the Tennessee 3, as they're calling them. And I also found or read last night that one of the representatives that was expelled from the House has been reinstated. They'll probably do the other one today, and then they're still going to have to run for a special election, but they have been reinstated. I read that this morning. I think that came from NBC. So, yeah, pay attention, y'all. And we've got to pay attention. This is the kind of stuff that's happening And then you got representatives in, I think it's Iowa or Idaho, saying that they've never met kids that are hungry, that they don't need to fund the school food program, the free lunch program, because he doesn't know any kids that are hungry when his district that he represents has some of the highest poverty rates, but he's never met a kid that's hungry. But they increased their per diem from $35 to $45 a day, because you can't eat on less than $45 a day, seriously. So we just need to be paying attention, right, guys? This is about power. This is about control. So we need to all step up, all the reasonable people in the middle. Notice I said reasonable. I didn't say all the people that agree, because we can we can disagree without being disagreeable. So we need everybody to step up, right? And use your voice. All right. Also, coming up in May, I'm really excited. I've never done this before. I'm going to do a launch party in May. So my new website, the services, all those kind of things. I've got a freebie for you guys. That's like a big super duper sizzle reel with lots of, it's about 10 minutes, I think. That's got lots of really good nuggets in it just to get you going and get your spirit lifted. And then I've got a couple of other things, a 30-day challenge you can buy into for like $37. That's a little short video every day for 30 days to help you shift your perspective, because, the Rutledge perspective, right? Help you shift your perspective. And then if you are a female founder, I've got a video series for you, $67. That's going to be, cheap, y'all, for the amount of work I put into them. That's 5 biggest mistakes to avoid as a founder, right? So that's a little video series. So, but I'm going to launch the new website so you can see this evolution and revolution of my business, of me, of how I'm showing up in the world, how I'm showing up to serve you, the impact I want to make, this foundation that I'm determined to build, all that kind of stuff is coming. So we're going to do a live launch in May. Never done it before, so you'll have to give me a little bit of grace. I have no idea how it's going to go or what it's going to look like, but we're going to do one. So we'll be grabbing our glasses of champagne or whatever your favorite adult beverage is and getting on Ecamm or Zoom or something and doing a launch and walking everybody through the new website. Still haven't taken new pictures yet, but y'all are going to see some pictures I very rarely use. So I'm excited about that. So join me, keep watching and following, and you will see the launch of the website. Okay. So today I want to talk about risk. And hopefully I was talking to Bridget last night, and hopefully she is on either LinkedIn or something. You have to give them permission. You have to give StreamYard permission for me to see your name so that I can see your comments. So hopefully everybody is able to see and hear me right now. So and everybody on KCOH is able to see and hear, because this one is, it's deep, but it's also something I don't think we think about in the right way. So one of the things that the experiences that I have, the skills that I have, that makes me uniquely qualified to deliver the services I deliver in the way I deliver them, is some time that I spent at Deloitte in enterprise risk management. And so when Deloitte started enterprise risk management, that was like the beginning of that whole thing, right? That whole idea of how do we manage risk in an enterprise? And it came out of the whole Enron debacle and Sarbanes-Oxley coming and all that kind of stuff. And so Deloitte was on the leading edge of that, of enterprise risk management. And so I ended up going to work for an old boss of mine who was a partner there at Deloitte as the firm began to build this enterprise risk management practice. And so I was there in Detroit. Good morning. Thank you so much for letting me know. I was able to go and work there in Detroit when it first started. My main client was General Motors. And then I moved to Houston to start the practice here in Houston. And the thing about enterprise risk management that is really kind of the foundation for the way I want to talk about risk is this. In enterprise risk management, we define risk as anything that gets in the way of you achieving your objectives. Anything that gets in the way of you achieving your objectives. Now, most of the time when you hear somebody talk about risk management, I'm in risk management, you're thinking about insurance with an I. You're thinking about insurance, right? Flood insurance, life insurance, long-term care insurance, pet insurance, insurance, right? That thing that we buy that sometimes really irritates us because we're spending all this money, right, on insurance and nothing happens. But the minute you don't pay that premium, right, something happens. So there's that. When people talk about risk management, usually they're talking about insurance. Well, when you think about risk, I want you to think about risk in three different buckets, right? So again, risk is enterprise risk management, right? Is understanding the risks, anything that can get in the way of you achieving your objectives. That's a risk. Anything that can get in the way of you achieving your objectives. And then you respond to that. The challenge, I think, is we often think in extremes. We are either risk avoidant, right? We don't want to take on any risk. We're really risk averse, or we are huge risk takers. We tend to talk in extremes. But there are three ways you can deal with, understand, identify, and manage risk. And depending on where you are in your business, in your organization, in your career, in your life, right? There's different ways that you may want to handle whatever risk is coming up. So there is absolutely risk avoidance. Do whatever you can do to avoid whatever that risk is happening. There is risk management, right? The risk is going to happen. So I just want to manage the risk to the best of my ability. And then there's risk mitigation, right? Which kind of fits somewhere in the middle. Risk mitigation is we're going to put some things in place to mitigate the impact of that risk, right? So management, you're just managing the risk. Mitigation, you're actually trying to impact the impact of the risk, right? So you can avoid it, you can manage it, you can mitigate it. What happens a lot of times when we talk about risk, and I think this is timely now because we're seeing more and more numbers. The numbers are increasing more and more of people who are making the choice to take their side hustle, right, and go make that a permanent thing. There are businesses who are trying to decide what kind of risk they're going to take because we're hearing all this news about not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy and what's happening there. There's a lot of people making moves right now. And at the crux of those is having a recognition or awareness of some kind of risk that's happening and then doing something to manage or mitigate or avoid that risk. Now, we don't always articulate it that way, right? Sometimes we're just like, oh, we just got to make a plan. Well, making a plan is a way to manage, avoid, or mitigate risk, right? Now, you have those people who are complete risk avoiding. Right. They're just getting out of bed is a thing. And the older you get, it's a risk getting out of bed some days. I know for me, I'm like, oh, what muscle was that? Right. But then there are folks who are good morning. There are absolute huge risk takers. Those folks who climb Mount Everest, the folks that do the extreme sports, right? There are big risk takers. The folks that when they talk about people who are millionaires or billionaires or whatever, they tend to be risk takers, right? They're willing to fail fast. They're willing to just try something and see what happens, throwing spaghetti up against the wall. They are not at all risk averse. In fact, sometimes they are risk seekers, right? They're thrill seekers. But if you think about risk in a calculated and intentional manner, and a big, broad, anything that gets in the way of me achieving my objectives manner, then you can make an intentional decision as to why and how and what you want to do with respect to the things that may get in your way, right? So the first thing is you got to know what it is you're trying to do, right? I always talk about those 4 questions: who you are, where you are, what you want, and what it takes to get there, right? So who you are and where you are, get really clear on you. Know you. Know if you tend to accept a lot of risk, you don't accept it. Know you. And then get really clear on what it is you want, because only after clarifying what it is you want, can you then make the plan of action and then understand what risks come with that plan, right? You see how that all connects, right? It's whatever you're doing, building a business, building a career, building a life, alignment, vision, action. Understand who you are, where you are, what you want, and what it takes to get there, right? It all is those same 4 things, right? Answering those same 4 questions and moving in those 3 places: alignment, vision, and action. So if you know clearly what it is you want to do, then you can go back and say, okay, if I want to build a multifamily housing place, that's my what. I'm really clear on that. I'm doing it because I believe there is not enough affordable housing, or I believe that generational wealth, really a big piece of that is owning real estate and having investment property is a piece of that, right? Whatever your why is, that alignment, right, of who you are and where you are. And what I want to do is build a multifamily building, right? That's what I want to do. I want to have this place where people can afford to live. And there's other maybe amenities. I'm planning the whole thing, right? I want it to be a really great thing. And this is probably coming to me because I have some design clients, right? And then I was watching something the other day about a guy in Minnesota who's building these amazing houses in these neighborhoods that are blighted. And so that's my objective is to build this amazing multifamily housing unit. That's what I want to do. So then I start making my plan, and I've got to find the land. I've got to buy the land. I've got to find a contractor. I've got to get a design and architect that I like if I'm not already buying a building, right? And just having to redo it. Good morning. I have to get designers that are like in line with my vision. I have to determine how I'm going to find tenants. I have to, make sure I have the right contractors to maintain the building. I have to find a good man, right? All of these things, right? Because my objective is to build an exceptional multifamily housing unit, right? Got to keep your eye on the ultimate goal. And then as I start moving towards that, I'm like, oh, okay, did I think of everything? What did I miss? That's your risk mind starting, right? If I don't find the right land in the right amount of time for the right amount of money, I'm not going to be able to build it, right? So I start managing or mitigating that risk. My first management of that risk is I am going to narrow my search into places where I have, or to mitigate that risk, I'm going to narrow my search into places where I know I can afford, that has the kind of land I want or an existing building or whatever. I'm mitigating the risk of not being able to find and afford to purchase something. Then I'm going to manage that risk, right? I'm managing the risk of not being able to find something by ensuring all my finances in order, right? Ensuring I have a really great realtor, right? I'm managing all of the pieces. I'm making sure that I'm spending time doing it, right? I'm doing active things to ensure something happens versus putting things in place to make sure something doesn't happen. Y'all see that little bit of a twist? Management is managing the things that are happening to control impact. Mitigation is trying to prevent some pieces from happening, right? Prevention versus acknowledgement and then and managing the impact, right? So I do those things to make sure I find the thing. And then I get the building. Woo! Or I get the land. I'm so excited. Now we get to start moving. Oh man, do I have the right permits? Do I have the right contractor? Am I going to actually be able to build this in the right amount of time? How am I going to meet the specs? Am I dealing with somebody who actually knows the specs and who's going to show up? Like all of the things, right? Because here's the deal. Now I've bought the land and all this kind of stuff. Now, not only is my money invested, my mind, my reputation, my brand, all that stuff is now invested. Remember I said a minute ago, enterprise risk management, right? Or big risk management is understanding, identifying, and figuring out what you're going to do about anything that could get in the way of you achieving your objective. My objective is having this extremely successful multifamily housing unit. So now I've got to think about reputational risk. Ooh, if I build this thing and I can't get anybody in there, or I build this thing and I've got a manager that turns it into a slum, right? That they are not fixing people's water, if I don't have good security and build it with quality so that the doors can't just be kicked in, if I, all of these things, right? Then I'm trying to manage reputational risk. Not only, right, the actual risk of physical harm to people who are taking advantage of living in my building that I've created, this great environment that I'm trying to put in place. But now if I don't do it well, I am dealing with my reputation and my name. And I think I've told you before, my parents always told us, even when you have nothing, if you have a good name, you have everything, right? So now my reputation's on the line. And when we're talking about taking risk, are you willing to do what is needed to ensure that you are still achieving the goal while protecting your brand, protecting your reputation? What risk are you going to avoid? Because the impact of those risks to your reputation is unacceptable. For example, I know that I'm going to do my research around who the best contractors and architects are in this industry and in my location, because I am not going to be penny wise and pound foolish. I'm not going to cut corners in the development that are later going to come bite me in the butt, because if you can't do it right the first time, what makes you think you're going to have time, money, energy to do it right again, right? Or to do it right later, or to fix it later, right? So now I'm thinking, okay, if I've got to manage this risk of my reputation, my ability based on my reputation to get it built and then get it leased or rented or whatever I'm going to do with it, right? If it's mixed use, I got to get, store owners. If it's just housing, I've got to get tenants in, got to get a building manager, building maintenance, got to get all the things. But if my reputation is shady, that's going to bleed over into my building being shady, right? So now all the money that I have invested, all the resources I've invested, time, energy, money, right, are going to potentially be wasted because I have not thought about and determined intentionally what I'm going to do to manage the risk to this ultimate outcome that I'm trying to have, right? So I'm worried about, I got to get the right people. But I've identified that is important in order for this to ultimately be successful. They got to have the right people on the team. Okay. So I am willing to take a risk of a later groundbreaking date for the right people. I have assumed the risk and I have managed, right, that risk of poor construction by doing my research, right, and taking the time to get the right person. And I have mitigated the risk of poor construction by not just taking anybody that comes to me and says, I can build your building, right? Eliminated the bad, planned for the encapsulation and the working through of the good. I would rather take more time and get it right than rush through and get it wrong and have to do it multiple times, or worse yet, not be able to fix it because I've used all my resources in doing it wrong in the first place, right? So my ability to determine what the biggest risk is critical to inform my actions, right? So when you think about risk, I want you to think about risk bigger than just avoiding it, bigger than just something you can insure with an I, insure. It's bigger than that. And we all take risks, right? I will never forget when I decided that I was done. I was just done. And I decided it in December. And then I went and told him in February. And I had reached out to a really dear friend of mine who was a confidant and who understood the situation and all this kind of stuff and said, hey, I'm just letting you know, this is what's happening. And so I'm out. Here's what I'm telling him. Here's what I'm going to do. And it was just, for me, the evaluation process was, I can stay and continue to be in this environment and accept the risks to my health, mental, physical, emotional. I can accept the risks to my reputation, my professional reputation within this organization. I can accept the risks to what I ultimately want to do in my life. I can decide to stay, which is saying that all of these things that I know to be true, I am accepting them. I'm accepting those facts and accepting the risks to my very being by staying. I'm making a definitive decision that those risks are acceptable to me and that I can figure out some kind of way to deal with them. Well, my decision was no, they're not acceptable. They're absolutely not acceptable. But in doing that, I also had to have a broader conversation with myself about what risks are acceptable, right? And this is the key piece that I think sometimes people overlook when you're trying to make really big decisions that impact your life, that impact your welfare, your money, right? Your job, all of these kind of things. It is important. It's not important. It is critical that you are in a position that you are not going to hurt you because you're mad at them. Don't hurt you because you're mad at them, right? Take a pause so that you can understand the risks of staying and the risks of going. You need to be able to have a clear mind to be able to think through those things. And then once you do that, you can also determine, you know what, I do have time to make this plan. I have time to do this and do this in a way that is going to be beneficial to me and is going to support the reputation I intend to have both while I'm here and when I'm gone. The legacy I want to leave, right? Because legacy doesn't necessarily mean when you die. You're creating a legacy every day you interact with somebody, right? You're creating your brand every day that you work with somebody and that you interact with somebody. So I made the decision that, yeah, I am the risk of going out and just starting something on my own and not knowing really how to do that or what's going to happen or whether I can and all that kind of stuff. I am willing to take a risk and bet on me in order to ensure that these risks to my very health and well-being are eliminated. These risks are eliminated. I didn't want to manage them anymore. I didn't want to mitigate them anymore by emails and tracking and, holding stuff because people like to change what really happened, right? They like to rewrite history. That CYA is a real risk mitigation process. I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to do it anymore. The risk, accepting the risk of the unknown was more acceptable to me than continuing to manage or mitigate or avoid the risks in the organization in which I was working, right? That was the decision that I made. But I also took the time to say, what does that mean? What does that mean? Part of risk management is understanding what your worst case scenario is. What was my worst case scenario? My worst case scenario, I sell my house, I sell all my stuff, right? My car's paid for, sell all my stuff and move home. Now, that would be really embarrassing, right? That would be embarrassing, but it wouldn't be fatal. I'd still be here. I'd probably be saving a lot of money, right? I'd be able to spend a whole lot of time with my family, and I miss them dearly. So that would have been great, right? So part of your risk management process is understanding what is your worst case scenario, right? My worst case scenario was I was not going to be out on the street, not able to eat. As long as I had my family, as long as I had cousins, right, that I knew, as long as I had good friends, I was not going to be homeless or hungry. My worst case scenario was embarrassment and getting rid of a bunch of stuff, which I probably don't need anyway, right? Managing your risk and or assuming risk is an intentional act. Let me rephrase that. It should be an intentional act. It should be an intentional act. We see people all the time take risks that don't think about it, right? Driving 400 miles an hour on these Houston freeways just because they got somewhere really fast to go. And it's like, okay, but that's great. But if you don't get there in one piece, what does it matter that you got there quicker? Because if you don't survive, you're not going to get there either, right? What are the risks that we assume every day, that we face every day, that we do not take the time to actually evaluate, understand, put in the right place, determine what our action is going to be, that we can manage a whole lot better to get to our ultimate outcome, right? There are absolutely some things to avoid. Absolutely, right? You want to avoid those things that are going to be physically harming to you. You want to avoid those things that might put you in jail, right? Compliance issues if you're running a business, theft, harassment, all those kind of things. If you're in an organization, you want to avoid those things that put your very job at risk, at least to your knowledge. You do want to avoid those things that are going to make a decision for you before you're ready to make a decision, right? Those are the things you want to avoid. Those things that cause you physical, emotional, mental, financial, the things that cause you harm are things you absolutely want to avoid, right? Then you look at the things that you're just going to manage. Because if you're going to do anything, there is going to be risk associated with it. So you have to know, remember alignment, right? Who you are and where you are. What are the things that you are willing to manage through, right? What are you willing to manage through? Yeah, I have a listener here. Good morning. I'm so glad you're here from Chandler, Arizona. After going through a really bad breakup with a job I loved, sold everything I owned and moved to Maui. Didn't have a plan in place, but took the risk and had an amazing experience. And that's the thing. Sometimes the risk is betting on you. Thank you for sharing that. It's betting on you. You may not know anything else, but if you know you, that gives you a foundation and a basis upon which to take some risk. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can bet on the fact that I will figure it out. That level of confidence and competence and comfort in your own capability can give you a lot of strength to test some things and to try some things that you have no idea what the real solution is or what the outcome may be. But what you do know is you. What you do know is you, right? And sometimes I don't think we give ourselves enough credit because we are so programmed, right? We're programmed to rely on people, and we are human beings, right? We're community type people. We are beings that like community, like collectiveness, right? We like being together. We don't exist in vacuums. That can also create some levels of dependency that keep us stuck and keep us fearful. And so when I talk about alignment intentionally, right, it's a reason that I use alignment, vision, action. You have got to get really clear on who you are and where you are, because if you do that, then your ability to respond to risk that you may not have seen, because you can't possibly know everything, your ability to respond to it and determine what you're going to do with it, manage it, mitigate it, or avoid it, is much greater because you know you. You know you. There's a mantra that I have on my computer. I've got several. Actually, I've got two. I shouldn't say several. I have two. They're taped up to the side of my big screen, because I have two screens. They're taped up to the side of my screen. I see them every day, all day, every day. One of them says, in this moment, you are enough. In this moment, you have everything you need. That's the first one. That's the one at the top. But the next one says, I want to be the woman that God intended me to be. And I am willing to be uncomfortable to become her. I am willing to be uncomfortable to become her. What does that mean? I am willing to see the purpose that I know is divine, the goals and outcomes I am moving towards. I'm willing to see those, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get there. I'm not going to think about the how. I'm not going to get all caught up in how, because that's where we get stuck, is in the how. I'm going to keep my eyes focused on the what, and the how will show up. And through that how showing up, I can be focused on, not going to do that, right? Because not all money is good money. I'm not going to get in business with that. I'm not going to partner with this person because I see how they move. That is not a risk I am willing to take, right? That's a risk I'm going to avoid. I'm not going to be ugly. I'm not going to be nasty, but we can't do business together, right? And I know so many people, I might be able to do a referral, but if I really think you're shady, I'm not even going to refer you. Because see, I don't want you doing to somebody else what you're going to try to do to me, right? That is a risk I'm going to avoid because I know me and I know my tolerance. Then I'm looking at, okay, if this is where my goal is, like going back to that multifamily, right? Or if I take my personal one, this $100 million foundation for education that I want to build, I need to manage some risk there. Some of that management is, as I build it, I've got to get the right people who know how to run really big foundations. I've never done that before. Now, I'm really smart. Right? It took me a long time to say that. I am exceptionally intelligent, right? And more importantly, in that intelligence is an ability to build a team. I know how to see talent. I know how to ask the right questions. I know how to set clear expectations. So the way I manage a foundation that's going to have $100 million in it, which is a lot of money, and be able to manage that foundation in a way that continues to support the goals of the foundation to tackle 3 key pillars in K through 12 education, and to maintain the reputation of the foundation as ethical, as in compliance, as using the money for the purpose which it was intended, then I'm going to manage the risk to those things by hiring the right people. And by firing them if something shows up later that I didn't see in the beginning, because sometimes that happens, right? I am not going to be fearful of making the right decision from a human asset perspective, because it's not about me. It's not about them. It's about the goal that we're trying to achieve. And I can help someone be successful somewhere else without being nasty, right? So I'm going to manage the risk of that thing by making sure that I pay attention. And then there's ones that I'm going to mitigate. We're talking about education. We're talking about public education. We're talking about a quagmire of crap that has been built over generations, that is so political, that is so messed up, that you can't even get a normal budget when the math for the budgets for education is 1 + 1 = 2. It's pretty simple. It's not tax math, right? It is simple budgeting math. That's it. Here's where we get the revenue. Now that's complicated, the whole property tax thing. And that's all got systemic racism and gentrification, all kinds of stuff in that, right? But once it gets into the school system, that's simple math. So my mitigation piece around this foundation is, you know what? We are going to make sure that we have very clear rules. We are going to make sure that when we go work with schools, that we are working with people who are reputable, that we are paying attention to what's going on. We are going to set guidelines and guardrails. That's how we mitigate the risk to the misuse of the funds. That's how we mitigate the risk of the reputation of the foundation. That's how we mitigate the risk of not really helping those children who are hungry, right? So you identify those risks, and then you determine, what am I going to avoid? What am I going to manage? Because it just is what it is, right? It's $100 million foundation. There's just going to be stuff we have to manage. We're just going to manage them. Pull our big people pants on, and we're just going to manage them. And then there's others that, should they occur, they're going to be so detrimental that we are going to mitigate those. We're going to put things in place that are early warning signals. That's why you do things like audit. An audit is a risk mitigation process, especially an internal audit, right? An internal audit is a risk mitigation process. We're going to go through what we said we're doing. We're going to go through the processes we said we put in place. We're going to butt those up against our compliance rules and all the other things that we said. And we are going to come out with a report that says you are or you are not doing what you said you were going to do in a way that is compliant and legal and ethical. It is a risk mitigation process when done well. There are a lot of internal audit departments that just stink. They don't half know what they're doing, right? And then there are ones that are exceptional. And I know people that are running those departments. And for those of you who are trying to figure out what you want to do, if you're new, right? If you're newer, earlier career, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, you're not quite sure, take some accounting classes, go get an internal audit group. It's the fastest way to learn a lot about an organization because you get to see everything. It's the fastest way to learn how processes work. It's a way to get to know people and to figure out what you really want to do because you see everything. Don't sleep on internal audit. Good internal audit. It's a great place to start. That's just a little sidebar. Mitigating the risk of not knowing what you want to do and just not doing anything that's productive, right? Think about internal audit. So I want you guys who are listening, I want you to rethink when we talk about risk. It is something beyond insurance, right? It's beyond insurance. In some ways, insurance is a mitigation play in that you're mitigating the cost to you of a catastrophe that may or may not happen, right? In other ways, it's a management process, right? We're managing our very emotions, right, around what could happen, right? We're managing some things that we can manage because natural disasters we can't control. Fires we can't necessarily control. There's things that we just can't control. We can mitigate them by having security systems, by having, fire alarms, by having fire extinguishers, by having the those sprinkler systems. We can mitigate the impact of the risk, right? By putting those things in place, and we can manage them by doing regular safety drills. We can manage them by making sure we're testing our smoke alarms and all those kind of things, right? We can manage those things, manage them by having insurance that we pay for. But to avoid every risk, one, is not possible. And two, is not a life. It's not a life. Again, opening your eyes and getting out of bed is a risk because you don't know what's going to happen that day. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you just get up and step wrong and the next thing you know, you've, cracked a toe or something. Been there, done that, right? Ran into a chair, not paying attention, running too fast, something, right? It is impossible to avoid every risk that exists. It's just not possible. And what are you doing keeping your genius from the people who need you by spending all your time trying not to ever get into a risky situation. What are you doing? Right? You are preventing people who need you from having access to you and your genius because you're so worried about avoiding every risk, everything that could possibly be painful. Welcome to life. Welcome to adulthood. Welcome to existence, right? You cannot possibly avoid every risk. But what you can do is be vigilant. What you can do is be aware. What you can do is be intentional in your actions and clear about your vision so that your actions get you to the place that you're trying to go. And you are so aware of who you are and where you are that as you're moving along those action plans, if you get that information that says, oh, I might need to adjust, you are adaptable enough, flexible enough, have broad enough perspective around what new risks may be there that you can make that flex. Right? You're not so rigid in your execution that you cannot even absorb external information that is telling you to do something different, or that is telling you you're on the right path. You're missing all of that because you're so worried about avoiding every risk, or you're so focused on the exact path that you put in place with the information that you had at the time. To be really great at managing enterprise-wide, life-wide, purpose-wide risk, one has to be able to be flexible, has to be so grounded in the vision that the how is flexible, right? Just like I was listening this morning to Joyce Meyer and they were talking about rejection, right? And sometimes my friend Lanier says this all the time. Sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes you didn't get it because it wasn't meant for you. Sometimes it didn't happen because it wasn't the time. You can't take every no as a commentary on your right to exist or your capability or your knowledge or your intellect. Because most of the time it has nothing to do with that. Sometimes the no actually doesn't have anything to do with you. I think that's why so many people, especially as I've entered this entrepreneur world, so many people have said, one of the things that entrepreneurs really need to learn how to do is sell. They need to spend some time in sales, and they need to spend some time understanding how to deal with no, how to move people through a no, how to move people past a no, or how to understand when there's a solid no and how to not take that no personally. Right. And I remember, and that's such good advice when you're talking about risk, because I remember when I was at Deloitte, right? Once you get to a certain level, it really is not about the work you do. It's about what have you sold for me lately? Right. That's most professional services firms, right? What have you sold for me lately? Because they're in the business of sales. They can't continue to build or deliver consulting services if there's no one to consult for, right? It's what have you sold for me lately? How big was it? How many hours did you get? How many people are you taking off the beach to put on your project, right? For me, this is Laurel personally, right? I hated selling. What I've realized is it wasn't so much the selling that was the problem for me. It was the unspoken rules, intentions, rhetoric that you were to sell at any cost. Didn't matter if they really needed it. Didn't matter if you were going to get follow-on. None of that stuff mattered. Only thing that mattered was the sale, the hours that were booked, and the check that was coming in. That was so not aligned with me. It just wasn't, right? And I sold some good stuff. But for me, it was more important to be able to have a candid conversation, a clear conversation with my potential client, to understand what they really needed, and to be able to say, you know what, you are not ready for me right now. You are not ready for the work that we can provide right now. You're not. And I cannot, in good conscience, take your money. Because see, the way I'm wired and the way I was taught, I'm thinking 4 steps down the road. I'm thinking to when we complete this multi-million-dollar project, you realize you didn't need it. And now we will never get any more work from you, much less potential work from anybody else that you talk to, because now you're angry and irritated and feel used. But I've had more people come back to me to say, You know what? You are so right. I was not ready, but I am now. So let's talk about how we can do this work together. That's what I'm talking about, right? Because the risk for me was personal integrity, personal reputation, and it was not worth it to me just to get a sale, to go against that. It just wasn't. So I knew that wasn't going to be long term for me. It just wasn't going to be, among other reasons, that just wasn't going to be long term for me. Because see, I got to see Enron happen, right? And there was so much stuff going on at the firm at that time. It just wasn't the place for me. And I knew that. It just, that the whole mindset and the whole culture, it just was not for me. And it's a great place for a lot of people. And it's a great training ground. So for those of you who are thinking about professional services, it's a fantastic training ground. You just have to keep yourself grounded, because it's easy to start breathing your own exhaust and believing your own hype when you're professional services, especially the further you get up and you're focused on sales, because all you're selling is what's in your head, right? So you have to have a certain level of ego, right, to be able to do that and not get offended. So it is a great training ground. It just was not a sustainable situation for me. And so the risk that I was managing, right, was how I wanted to show up in the world and that karma that I'm putting out there. When I had a sales conversation, right, with a client, I was managing the risk to long-term client retention, long-term client reputation, and relationship. That's what I was managing. I was mitigating client irritation, client anger, right? By asking the right questions, by digging deeper, by being truly upfront, right, about what was needed and what was missing, right? And by leaving, I was avoiding having to do things that were contrary to my very being, contrary to what I live in terms of integrity and reputation and truth, right? I was avoiding having to not be me, or having to be someone who is truly not me against my value system. I was avoiding that by leaving. And it was the right thing to do, right? And so we're all going to run up against those times. I mean, keep living, y'all. You're going to run up against those times where you have to make a real decision around whether the risk to you, your person, your reputation, your brand, your goals is worth. Is it worth your energy? Is it worth your money? Is it worth your time? Is it worth your effort, right? Is it worth spending your resources on that thing, on that feeling, right? Being at that party, being able to say, I am the VP of whatever, right? Is that title worth the risk to your mindset? Is that paycheck worth your mental health? Is that business you're building worth stability, right? Risk is about understanding your thresholds, understanding what you must avoid in order to keep yourself sane and healthy, what you must manage because you can't control them. You can't make sure they don't happen. So how are you going to manage them? And then what are you going to mitigate? What actions are you going to take in place to at least minimize the impact? Because see, they're going to happen. So how do you minimize the impact to you, your business, your legacy, your people, all the things, right? That's risk management. All right. I'm going to take a little bit of water here. Sure. I don't know. Were we able to get some numbers? Okay. All right. So.
Can I add this
Yes.
to what you said? I like what you said earlier. That you can't mess you up in order to hurt somebody else.
Right.
And if your reputation or your brand is on the line, then you have to make those decisions.
Right.
But also, what happens when you become into partnership? Maybe the partnership started off real good.
Yes.
You were aligned and you were on the same page. But now you're noticing they totally do business opposite the way you do business.
Yes.
But yet now you have clients and you have a business and now you have a brand.
Yeah.
And your name and reputation is kind of on the line. What do you do in those situations?
You know, that is such a good question, y'all, because there's collaborations, there's partnerships, there's official partnerships, right? Business partnerships. We're talking risk, right? One of the most critical things you do to manage, avoid, and mitigate risk when you're even considering a collaboration or partnership is get all of the expectations in writing. Write it down while everybody's still friendly. Write it down while everybody's still excited and focused and knowing where they want to go. Write it down when the air is clear. So when the air starts to get a little cloudy, there is a document, an agreement to go back to say, you know what? This is what we said. What's happening is not aligned with what we said. So we've got to now decide what we're going to do about that. Right? One of the key pieces, if you're talking about collaboration or partnership, is to get it done live. So I got a link to you. How do we call in to comment live? So right now we can't comment live, but that's coming. So keep listening to the show, right? So today we're not able to do that. But we do have a phone number at the station that we are going to have live going forward, for people to be able to do a live commentary. So I apologize for that. But I'm listening, I'm watching your comments. So feel free to type. I know it's a lot to type. Feel free to keep typing because I'll read them and respond to them. But that partnership piece, Jerry, that's a key piece because people get real excited about partnerships, and they're all lovey-dovey, and this is going to be awesome. And we have the same vision, we have the same desire, we have right the rose-colored glasses. Everything's beautiful. Life is beautiful. And then there's a client that doesn't want to pay, or pays differently, or has scope creep, and one person doesn't worry about scope creep. It's like, oh no, that's okay, we'll just do this one thing. And the other person's like, no, because if we do one, we're going to be doing 12. That doesn't work, right? All of a sudden, the way you respond to things is different. A really, really good book about this is the book that is Stacey Abrams and her partner, Laura Hodgson. And I think, is it called Lead from the Outside? I know I was going to miss it. But look up Stacey Abrams and Laura Hodgson. And it is about their partnership, right, and leadership. This business, these several businesses that they built together. A couple of them failed, right? They're in a business now together that's doing really well. But a business, failed for them. And they are so, in many ways, they are similar in that they tend to be night owls, that kind of thing. But in other ways, they are completely opposite. Like one of them was very, very much the salesperson, the person who's going to be in front of the boards, the person who's the handshaker, right? The glad hander, all that. And then Stacey was very much behind the scenes, right? Very quiet, very introverted, very methodical, right? And very clear, but didn't necessarily want to or need to be kind of the face of the business. But they knew that early. And they had agreements early. And they appreciated each other's differences and the great genius that each brought to the organization early. And they made sure that they stayed in those lanes and recognized when they needed to ensure that their people, as their business grew, that their people understood the lanes, that their people understood what Laura was going to do, what Stacey was going to do. When you saw just one or when you saw both, how you responded to either, who was really leading it, right? That kind of thing. Because when Stacey was running, you didn't see her a lot, but then she'd show up to a meeting and people were like, who is this person? Right? And why is she telling us what to do? Why does she have this stage? Because they didn't know. And what they realized was, as leaders, they needed to let their people know about the agreements that they had. They needed to let their people know how they work, right? That's what is so important, and what I love about this Founders Intensive that I've got going for female founders making multi-seven figures, is that crossover from founder to CEO is a bear, man. It's not impossible by any means, but it is a direct shot to your heart. That's why I tell people, I need you to keep leading with your heart, but I need you to act with your head. That shift from founder to CEO can be really difficult and painful because you can no longer be in the bowels of every decision. You cannot be in everybody's meeting. You can't be the mentor to everybody on your team. You cannot, not if you want to continue to run the amazing business that you've built and grow it. It's just not possible. You can still be you. You can still create, support, uplift, build the culture that you put in place. Absolutely. Because see, that's about your brand and how you show up. And you can move into that CEO role by making sure you are managing the risk through being very clear, setting clear expectations, making sure you understand how you communicate, when you want to communicate, what you want to communicate, right? All of that stuff comes together to manage the risk of moving from founder to CEO, because it is a risk. And you've built an amazing business and you don't want it to go downhill just because your feelings are hurt or you're afraid to hurt somebody else's feelings. Because here's the secret. You're building a business and you're not responsible for making sure everybody that works for you is happy. Your happiness and their happiness is not your responsibility, right? You're responsible for you, but you're not responsible for their happiness. What you are responsible for, depending on the reputation of your organization, is making sure that people come to a place that's safe to work, that they understand the value of the work that they're providing, that they feel some level of joy and connection to the work that they're doing. But even that, you can only do so much. That stuff is intrinsic to the person. And if you're running around trying to chase making everybody happy, you are not going to be able to run your business, because every time somebody's unhappy, you're going to be turning yourself into a pretzel to fix it. Part of your risk management is it's avoiding trying to make everybody happy. That is a risk you need to avoid, because somebody's always going to be unhappy. And how do you manage the risk, right, of employee joy, employee engagement, all that kind of stuff? You're clear, you're consistent, right? You're truthful, you're honest, you talk to people, right? You let people know where you're going, you set clear visions. That's how you kind of manage and mitigate that whole process. And then when people are truly, they just can't get where you're going, you, with love, release them. Release them with love. I like to say, help them be successful somewhere else. Because as long as you've treated them well, you've done everything you could. You have created an environment where one thing they can't say is that they're mistreated. They may leave you, but they may also become an ambassador for you. You know what? I had to go because they were moving into a line of business that I just didn't like, or it just wasn't aligned with my thing. I really wanted to be very narrowly focused on this one niche. A lot of individual contributors like that, right? Project managers. I just want to be, we used to have this in my previous company a lot, scientists, those hardcore scientists, they want to be in the science. Don't make them lead a bunch of people. That's not what they want to do. They want to be in the science, right? So you may have people who really love their zone of genius is narrow and strong for them. And so they may make the decision that the risk of continuing to have to operate outside of their zone of genius is not acceptable to them. And that's not about you, because you're running a business, right? It's about them. But you have treated them well, you've acknowledged, you've done what you could do, and you've been forthright with them about those kind of things. So they leave, but what they're telling people is, you know what? But it was so great to work with them. They were such good people to work with. I just wanted to do something different, but man, I loved working there. You've now created a bunch of ambassadors, right? And they're telling people about you in a way that an insider can tell them, right? This is what it means when you work there. These are the kind of things you're going to feel. This is how the leaders work, right? It's not a bad thing to have some turnover. In fact, you need a level of turnover. We've gotten to this thing where, oh my gosh, turnover is bad. Turnover is not bad. Turnover is necessary. Excessive turnover generally points to some kind of issue, right? But turnover in and of itself is not a problem, right? It is not a risk to avoid. You should not be in the business of avoiding turnover. You should be in the business of managing turnover and mitigating the situations that create turnover that are undesired, right? All right. So as you go through this week, y'all, I want you to just reset your mind around risk mitigation, risk management, right? Risk avoidance. If you're going to exist, if you're going to do this thing that you're put on this earth to do, right? If you're going to pursue your dreams, you are going to be faced with risk. And it is important that you know, one, who you are and where you are, so that you can determine that you are okay with betting on you, and whatever comes, you can handle it. You got to get there first, especially if you're taking a big leap into an unknown. You got to get right with you first, so you and you know where your strength comes from, right? That's why I always start with my clients with alignment. Who are you and where are you? Start there. And then see risk for what it is. A fact of life, a fact of existence. If you're going to do anything, there's going to be risk, right? But I got you. I got you. And you got this. So remember, in this moment, you are enough. In this moment, you have everything that you need. Thank you for tuning in to the Rutledge Perspective today. I really appreciate it. Love a good Tuesday. I will be back. I will not be back next week. Remember, the show will not air next week on the 18th. I'm actually starting a development thing myself, and the kickoff is next week during the radio show. So I will not be here next week, but I will be here the week after that. So catch KCOH and all the other amazing shows next week that are on KCOH TV Radio, The Boost. Make sure that you are tuning in to the radio station, and then I will plan to catch you the week after next on Tuesday, 10 a.m. Central Time here on KCOH and on my Facebook page, my YouTube channel, all that good stuff. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank you, Arizona. Thank you, all my LinkedIn listeners. Thank you, all my Facebook listeners. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. Thank you, all you folks on KCOH page. We will catch you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
You were tuned into the #1 station in the nation, KC.